Hello, welcome to the Black Sheep. I am Jake Klein, guest hosting for Salome today. I'm going to start doing some shows now and then. Salome, my co-founder of the Black Sheep, her shows are always going to be a little bit more philosophical, a little bit personal, a little bit about, developing yourself and your Black Sheep path. And I'm going to start hosting some shows which are going to be more political. Both of these aspects are core to what we're about at the Black Sheep. And so with that in mind, I want to talk a little bit about what we're all doing here, why we read the Black Sheep, why you might be listening to this stream. So as we've talked about in a lot of our content, the Black Sheep is an archetype. The Black Sheep is the person who's willing to speak truth to the herd, knowing that the herd doesn't necessarily want to hear it, and knowing the consequences they might face for that. Pressure to conform, culminating at its worst in exile or all sorts of persecution, and standing brave in the face of those consequences. This path has personal elements. How can you best live it? How do you deal with those challenges? How do you work up that courage and bravery? Whether you chose that path or whether you found yourself thrust into it by circumstance. But it also has political consequences. How can we create and maintain a society that values and protects these important Black Sheep voices? Part of that project is libertarianism, which both myself and Salome are very passionate about. That means having a society in which everyone is equal under the law, and force can only be used against those who initiated it. No one can initiate force. No one can use force against those who think differently, for thinking differently, or for any other reason. But another part of the political and cultural consequences of the Black Sheep archetype is that we need to listen to those voices. We need to be open to unconventional, challenging perspectives that Black Sheep have to offer us about all sorts of different political, cultural, and social situations. So, in addition to a lot of the individual shows that Salome has been hosting about psychology and a lot of other different topics, she and I are going to use this platform to start interviewing guests who we think have valuable Black Sheep perspectives that need to be heard. So today I'm happy to have Jeffrey Peoples on the show with me. Jeffrey's the author of a book called The Children of Amalek, which explains the ties between religious Judaism and the modern state of Israel, challenging both anti-Semitic conspiracy theories and claims that modern Israel is purely secular in origin and practice, as is often stated. You can read the book for free on his Substack, which is called Minority Report. For some time, I felt a little bit apologetic for continuing to talk about Israel and Jewish-related issues and Judaism on the Black Sheep. We've always wanted the Black Sheep to talk about a wide diversity of issues that archetype applies to, but given my Jewish and Zionist upbringing, my own Black Sheep path in relation to those identities has become quite a focus, especially since the start of Israel's war in Gaza. I've just kind of continually felt like there's more I need to say of substance to that discourse. And even though I've wanted at a lot of times to move on and start writing and talking about other things, I've just felt I have a message and it needs to get out. But at this point, I've started to feel like the tides are turning on this topic, and I'm not feeling quite as guilty for continuing to talk about it over here. There has been a huge fracture within the political right that I suspect a lot of you have been witnessing over the last couple months, since Donald Trump got into office and maybe since he won. There's been neoconservative figures like Douglas Murray and Konstantin Kisin and a bunch of other people who have been labeling those who disagree with the war as woke right anti-Semites and trying to gatekeep them certainly from the political right and political influence, but also kind of widely out of polite society. That's what happens when you call somebody an anti-Semite if they're not. You're basically saying that's a bad person. But thankfully for me and many others, I think the tide is starting to turn away from their efforts. Polling shows that 50% of Republicans under the age of 50 now have an unfavorable view of Israel, a jump of 15 points since the start of the war in Gaza. And in many ways, it seems like the fate of the right is hanging on this particular issue, making it more important than ever to discuss this now. But at the same time, in opening the gates to views critical of Israel and U.S. support for Israel's war, there does indeed seem to be a rising of genuine anti-Semitism that's been unleashed alongside it, and I'm concerned about that. Given the terrible history of anti-Semitism, it seems to me that there's been an understandable taboo against criticizing Judaism and Jewish culture since the end of World War II. And that being willing to break that very strong taboo correlates with being a deeply disagreeable person who often enjoys being offensive for its own sake, dragging up some of the worst stuff that was rightfully for a long time pushed to the fringes. But as an atheist who was raised Orthodox Jewish, I've long wanted this taboo to go away and to be filled by something better than the anti-Semitic conspiracies that have been the traditional criticism of Judaism. The atheist movement, of which I consider myself a part as a member of Atheists for Liberty, has long prided itself on its willingness to criticize Christianity and Islam, and it's done so with the intent of helping Christians and Muslims break free from a religion they understand is harming its own members. Yet Judaism has remained largely untouched by more considered, less disagreeable, less trying to shock and be offensive thinkers. And in my opinion, as an ex-Jewish atheist, this has come largely at the cost of Jews that this criticism would help to break free from a religion that has at least as many problems as Christianity and Islam. So with that in mind, when Jeffrey reached out to me and sent me his book, I was absolutely thrilled to read it and find somebody doing exactly what I think is needed. I was particularly impressed because it took me being raised in Judaism and thinking my entire life about it to come to many of the conclusions that I have. Yet Jeffrey wasn't raised Jewish and figured out all of these things on his own through his own thinking and reading and the relatively short period of time since October 7th. So, with that, Jeffrey, welcome to the Black Sheep. I am so happy you're here. So tell us a little bit about yourself and what led you to write this book.
Yeah, hi. First, I appreciate you inviting me on. I think that your introduction was very well done, and the primary reason that I wrote The Children of Amalek was related to the primary reason that I started writing Minority Report, and that was because of identity politics. And when I first began writing Minority Report, it was at the kind of beginning of the Black Lives Matter movement and the rise of woke culture. And me having the background I have, my background being my dad, he is a descendant of African slaves in the United States, and my mom is a descendant of Europeans. I am a mixture of a lot of different genealogical backgrounds, and I felt compelled because of my particular background to write on my perspective, which wasn't the dominant perspective that was being pushed by the quote left. And I felt my view was very important because I represented something that was more individualistic. I didn't identify with any racial background. I don't support racial tribalism, and I wanted to critique the racial tribalism that I saw was being promoted by a lot of different factions in political movements. And I knew that because of my background, it could be helpful because people are generally accustomed to being more open to people with a certain identity or background when they are critiquing a certain topics, and it would be easier. I have a certain amount of armor for, in some sense, from criticism because of my background. If I start critiquing the racial ideology of Black Lives Matter because of my background. And so I wasn't really concerned about my career, for example, because if someone went out and started calling me a racist for critiquing Black Lives Matter, I'd be like, well, I have my background is I'm a descendant of slaves. What are you going to do? That's just ridiculous. So, but once October 7th happened, I realized there was a connection between the way the Black Lives Matter movement and just the ideology of the woke left and what is now kind of being classified as the woke right, which is the racial ideology and the identity politics of Jews and Jewish nationalism, Christian nationalism, and how that sort of attacks about racism and slandering people based on just anytime you criticize Jews or Israel, people are going to be accused of anti-Semitism or racism. It's similar to if you criticize anything that the Black Lives Matter movement was promoting, person could be considered or slandered as racist. I thought, well, there's a connection here, and I wanted to investigate it and look into it and critique it. And so but I also realized that I don't have a Jewish background. So me writing about it, I had a lot more anxiety about writing Children of Amalek than writing the stuff I did about the Democratic Party and the history of slavery, for example. And because I don't have that armor, I'm now out in the open, and I'm much more vulnerable to slander if I criticize Judaism and Jews than I am vulnerable when I criticize the racial tribalism of Black people, for example.
Well, I hope I can help to provide you with some small modicum of that armor, because I don't think you've given a lot of interviews about this book, or maybe any interviews about this book yet.
Yeah.
So, having somebody that has that upbringing plug it for you hopefully gives some little bit of armor, although people will often call me a self-hating Jew or a capo, which is absolutely ridiculous. But, whatever they want to say, they will say it if they can find a way. So with all that said, what are those criticisms? I mean, I was really struck by the uniqueness of your book, because I see many, many excellent secular criticisms of Israel. And I see many, many great criticisms of the impact of Islam on the Palestinian side of the conflict. You'll occasionally see some very good criticisms of Judaism when it comes to the most radical settler end of Israeli politics. But people will say, oh, that's not representative. That's just a small faction or whatever. It's not a small faction. It's increasingly growing, particularly since the start of the war. But regardless, and then I see many bad critiques of the ties between Judaism and Israel that are just totally wrong. That all Jews just want Christians and Muslims dead, and the Talmud says something that's totally made up or taken out of context, and that's why Israel is doing everything that it's doing, and it's some sort of protocols of the elders of Zion plot. And so I've seen all of those different things, but I haven't seen what you've done, which was to read the Torah, read parts of the Talmud, I think, and come to something that is very straightforward, very right there in the text, and does actually carry through to the Jewish population in modern times, and has, forms a lot of the ideological foundations for the state of Israel, even by Jews that claim to be more atheist and secular and genuinely think of themselves that way. So what is it? What is going on here? What are your criticisms of Judaism, and in what way do they connect to this war?
So I think that one of the most common elements of people who consider themselves Jews, whether they're Zionist Jews or they're anti-Zionist Jews, is a sense of peoplehood. Okay, a sense of the Jewish people. And the concept of the Jewish people is central to the Torah, to the Tanakh. And the Jewish people is literally in the Torah identified explicitly as Israel. Like there's passages in the Torah where Yahweh, the deity of the Torah, calls the people of Israel Israel. This is the name of the people of Israel is Israel, and because the psychology of the Torah is very collectivist in nature, where the entire tribe of Israel, the people of Israel, are viewed as a singular entity, and they are judged as a single entity. They are rewarded as a single entity, and they are also commanded as a single entity. And the mythology of the people of Israel is deeply connected to a ethnic mythology, or a racial mythology, to be more specific. Where when I say racial, because when I say racial, I mean genealogical, where a people or a tribe is sufficiently determined, or one of the criteria of determining who is a member of the tribe is the person's ancestry. So when it comes to the people of Israel, one of the criteria, both in the Torah and in, for example, the Jewish law that is like discussed by Maimonides, which is one of the more well-known Jewish sages, as they're called, similar to Augustine in Christianity. And he has written lots and lots of books about Jewish law, and it basically goes into detail about his interpretation of the law based on the Torah and the Talmud. And he talks about the criteria for being Jewish. And one of the things he says, for example, about Jesus himself, like he wrote a letter to, I think it was an Ethiopian community or a Yemeni community, discussing Jesus. And he says that Jesus was a Jew because he was born of a Jewish mother, but not, which is interesting, not a Jewish father. And so he was considered a Jew by the standard of Maimonides. And that view of Jews as being a racial lineage, as a group of people who share they have ancestors that were part of the tribe, and then their ancestors were part of the tribe, and et cetera, back to Israel, which is weird, but the name of the progenitor of the people of Israel was Israel. Like the name the name of the progenitor is Jacob, but at some point in the Torah, he's eventually, his name is changed by Yahweh to Israel. So Israel is the parent of Israel. And that the whole concept of a lineage and identifying as part of the tribe because an ancestor was part of the tribe is part of the religious ideology of Judaism itself. It's one of the foundational and unique aspects of Judaism compared to, say, Christianity or Islam or Buddhism or Taoism or Confucianism. You go down the list of major religions, none of them have this membership through membership through, if your mother was a practicing member of the tribe or the religion, then the child is a member of the tribe in the religion. No other religion has that. And that is a big part of why, even to this day, a lot of Jews seem to perceive and conceive themselves as part of a racial group or an ethnicity, as opposed to just simply a religion. And it's not true, though, that there is that lineage. This lineage doesn't actually exist. I very much doubt that Jacob was a real human being and that he actually had children, that all Jews today are children of. I mean, that's absurd. And because there are Jews who are Ethiopian Jews, there are Jews in China, there are Jews in Europe, and so there's a lot of racial diversity and genealogical diversity among Jews. And also, because anyone can convert to Judaism, I could theoretically convert to Judaism. It makes the notion of a unified ethnic or racial group to be irrational. And yet that is still something that is heavily promoted by Zionists particularly, and by Jews in general, that even the anti-Zionist Jews often perceive themselves and conceive themselves as Jews primarily because their parents or one parent or their grandparents or they had some ancestor that was a member of Judaism, which from the perspective of other religions is absurd, because both my parents were Christian. I wasn't raised Christian personally, but I was probably raised as Christian as many Jews are today, raised Jewish in the sense of having to follow the 600 so commandments of the law of Moses. But because they believe that what makes them a Jew is that their parents are Jews, just that idea, that belief, they consider themselves Jewish. And they also have a devotion, which is another thing, a devotion to the people of Israel, the Jewish people. When you hear a lot of people talk, even anti-Zionist Jews, they'll talk about the Jewish people and they'll express the Jewish people as their people, as their tribe. And I don't view Christians as my tribe. My parents were raised Christian. By the time they had me and my brothers, they had abandoned the ideology and practice of Christianity, but I don't view Christians as my people. And I don't view, and I don't also view my people who share genealogical background with me as my people. Like what politically goes as Black people aren't my people, and what politically goes as white people aren't my people. My people are the people who I've chosen to have friendship and bonds with. and based on their character and personality and their values, not their genealogical heritage. So but that is a part of the Jewish religion, going back to the Torah. And it is part of the foundation of Israel, modern Israel. When Zionists like Herzl, they were often very secular. And in the sense they are secular, in the sense that they didn't believe in Yahweh. They didn't worship Yahweh, they didn't follow the commandments, but they continued to have faith and belief in the Jewish people. And they continued to have loyalty and devotion to the Jewish people. And they continued to believe in having a bond and just attachment to the faith of their fathers, as Herzl called it. And it wasn't a faith that he had. He didn't have the faith in Yahweh, but his father did. So he continues to connect to that tribe. He continues to connect to that people. And that is something that is part of Judaism, part of the ideology of Judaism, the idea that you should have this bond and attachment to the religion of your parents, and that a child is by nature, by metaphysically, part of the tribe simply because they're born into it, which I think is a problem. It's just a moral problem. Like, I don't think any tribe, any religion gets to decide that they own the child, that they have anyone that's part of the religion. Say Scientologists were like, oh, we have this new rule, and it's every child that's born to a mother who's in Scientology is now a Scientologist. Like, and they can't leave, by the way. They're just, if you start saying,
they're marked at the end of the first week of life with circumcision to make exactly this point.
They actually have to give a piece of their flesh as well. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're branded as a possession of this tribe, of this religion. And if a person leaves, if say a Scientologist grows up and is like, I don't really like this whole volcanoes and weird religion of Scientology and L. Ron Hubbard, and they're like, oh, you can't, well, you're just a self-hating Scientologist. You can't, we're not going to let you leave. You're going to be a Scientologist forever. And the people around them, like the non-Scientologists, were like, yeah, what are you doing? What are you doing? Why are you leaving your tribe? Why are you leaving your religion? Why do you hate yourself? There's a double standard when it comes to the way that a lot of people treat Judaism and as a religion, and other religions like Scientologists. Like, if the same behaviors were part of Scientology that Israel Judaism behaves in or promotes both in its ideology and what is being carried out by a lot of the most powerful and the most popular sect of Judaism today, the view of Scientology would be just abysmal. And people would be encouraging people to leave Scientology. They wouldn't be like, oh, let's try to reform Scientology so that that we don't have to give up the identity of being a Scientologist.
Yeah, I think a point you were trying to make at the end there is that Zionism is a branch of Judaism, essentially. Do I have that right? Yes, because it's not carrying on necessarily. I mean, there's religious Zionists, which you write about in your book, and, they have a more extreme ideology. But even among, the so-called secular Zionists, they don't believe in the religious narrative about, the existence of Yahweh. They don't believe, probably like you said, in the existence of Jacob as a historical figure, because they don't believe probably all of Genesis. They might not believe Exodus either. But they do believe in what the text says about this being one people, despite enormous evidence to the contrary. So we see, like you said, Jewish people of all different skin colors, and there have been mass conversion events all around the world. Many Jews share no ancestry with Jews from other places in the world because there was a king of Yemen in some century AD who converted the entire kingdom to Judaism. That was similarly practiced in the Khazarian Empire. And people theorize about that having a lot of those converts, forming a lot of the lineage of Ashkenazi Jews. That's been heavily challenged, I think rather successfully, but it's not very challenged that there was a mass conversion in the Khazarian Empire. There was also a lot of converts all around the Mediterranean region and North Africa. So the idea that this is all, one people, with a specific genetic lineage, it's clearly false. Ashkenazi Jews and Sephardi Jews have more heritage from genetic heritage from Rome than they do from Jerusalem. But yet, there's an ideology of connecting to Jerusalem, connecting to Israel, and seeing themselves as a part of that people rather than another people. And this is all socially constructed by the religion. And I think that's really worth paying attention to in this time period where we've spent the last many years, those of us that were involved in anti-woke politics, complaining about tribalism, right? Tribalism is bad. It leads people to fight with each other and divide into an us and a them. But when there's a group of people that literally identify as a tribe going back way through history and still a tribe today, you're not supposed to say that there's any problem with that identity. And challenging the identity is considered offensive and considered similar to challenging the people. I wrote a whole essay about the history of Hanukkah. Thank you.
Oh, it's good. Good.
Thank you. Where I make exactly this same point and show how this tribal identity has been weaponized against Jewish people that didn't want to act exactly how the tribe wanted them to act.
Non-Jewish people were often just, because of their, similarly the way that Nazis handled non-Jewish people during World War II, is that it gave your ancestor as these properties. If you are from this area, then you are identified as a Jew, and they are going to be persecuted on that ground. Like, that's horrible. That would be like that, the notion that just identifying people based on their ancestry as being part of a group and judging them based on some wacky characteristics of this group is what anti-Semitism fundamentally does. And what, as you were talking about, when the Maccabees essentially, and this is also in Ezra as well, in the Tanakh, where you have people in Judea or in Judeans who may have, like you mentioned, a more of a Greek culture. We're like, hey, we're not really following this stuff. Well, too bad. You are Jews, and if you don't follow it, well, we're going to kill you, which is not a good history, not a story that should be celebrated, as you wrote about.
Right. And if we were to take this idea of lineage from a theoretical Jacob seriously, then it would matter that the Palestinians, particularly Palestinian Christians, have more heritage from the region than most groups of modern Jews do. So why are they not considered part of the tribe? And the reason they're not considered part of the tribe is because at some point in history, they did not want to follow the tribal behaviors anymore and instead converted to Christianity and then later on to Islam. So, what are we saying? That these people, that today, how this affects modern Israel, one of many ways, is that you can live any place in the world and you can decide tomorrow to move to Israel and you'll be given citizenship if you're Jewish according to the rules of Orthodox Judaism, which means at least your mother is Jewish, like you said before. But if you're Palestinian, if you have a greater claim, not only in recent history, which I think is really what matters more, honestly, but, to take the, Zionist argument, but you have a greater claim in ancient history to ancestry from, the Jewish people that used to actually live in that region. Well, you're at best locked in the West Bank or Gaza, possibly pushed completely out of the area into refugee camps in Lebanon, Syria, etc. And you'll the whole Israeli political establishment and Zionist movement is about denying the right of return to that land that the Palestinian population was kicked out of in 1948. So I think that these socially constructed ideas of tribe and identity really matter a lot, and pointing out to people the ways in which they're not coherent and how belief in that incoherence harms people matters a lot. And another way in which anti-woke minded people should be cognizant of this is that, in addition to being against tribalism, another thing that we talked about was being against postmodernism, being against the idea that, well, this is really pre-modernism, but it's not modernism. So it's where postmodernism and pre-modernism merge, which is, it's not about the reality of the situation. It's not about looking at objective facts. It's about just whatever people believe about themselves. It's about whatever socially constructed narrative people want to create. That's how the world is, and that's how we should act in it, is take these social constructions as real and not try to seek to remove and replace them with accurate constructions based on reality as it is. So I think that's just very disappointing about the movement as a whole. Let's talk about this war specifically. So you named your book The Children of Amalek, and Benjamin Netanyahu and other Israeli leaders, compared this war to fighting Amalek. Tell us about that, why you gave the book that name, and what exactly those Israeli leaders meant when they were talking about fighting Amalek in this war, metaphorically.
Yeah, so the Children of Amalek, it refers to basically a lineage of people in the Tanakh who supposedly their forebears, some ancestors of them, attacked Israel on the way to, as it was, ironically, like the Zionists typically view Israel or Palestine as their homeland, but in fact, Israelites conquered, according to the mythology of Torah, they conquered Palestine, and so it wasn't their homeland. They were coming from Egypt, and they decided that Yahweh decided this is a really great land, so I'm going to give it to you, and everyone on there is going to die, and you have my blessing to kill them all, and their livestock as well. And on the way there, when they were going to carry out their genocide, they were attacked by the Amalekites, and because of that attack, Yahweh commands Israel to have like a a blood feud with them for all of eternity, where they are going to hunt them down and kill every one of them, including the camel and ass. Like, it's not just that they want to kill the Amalekites' children and their babies and their male fighters or anything. They want to kill their livestock. It's like gratuitous cruelty. And this is the mythology that was invoked by Benjamin Netanyahu in reference to Hamas, and I would argue Palestinians in general, as there's been plenty of language that's been used by politicians and social leaders suggesting that there are no innocent civilians. So if you call the people of Palestine Amalek, then just based on the story of the Torah and the Tanakh, what a person is doing is they are essentially calling for the extermination of those people. And the gratuitous destruction of Gaza is a reflection of that story. It's horrifying. Like, the amount of destruction that Gaza has faced is they've destroyed. I mean, you see pictures of it, it's gone. And that is the sentiment of that story and that command. And it's part of my book is what happens is a kind of contemplation of what happens when you view people as Amalek, when you view people as this people that are just deserving of extermination, and their children don't matter anymore, and you can do anything you want to them. That is
go ahead. Sorry.
No, you can go.
It's really disappointing because so many people have died is the main reason, but on the other side, on the warmongers side, even if Netanyahu, I don't think he believes in the actual historical Bible. I don't know. I think a lot of his coalition partners do. Certainly Bezalel Smotrich and Ben-Gvir do. Netanyahu, I kind of doubt it. Okay, so he doesn't believe that this story with Amalek actually happened, potentially. Mm-hmm. But it goes to show the fact that he would cite this, that those values are not just part of ancient history. There's something that this religion has kept alive until today. And that's one of the major problems of religion is, in one sense, it's good that they codify a certain structure, a certain social structure, because, societies and civilization can degrade, and they built something and you don't want to see it degrade. On the other hand, they also encode often very bad things, and that civilization and that society was maybe able to function, but it wasn't necessarily functioning optimally. This is kind of the whole divide, I think, between progressives and conservatives and atheists and religious people, is whether more good was encoded in these traditions, or whether more bad was encoded in these traditions, or whether, and I think this is my kind of view, even if it's not necessarily the case that more bad was encoded, that we have to allow enough flexibility to evolve so that we're not stuck with the bad in these traditions. And, this narrative of the genocide of Amalek is just one of many extremely disappointing religious stories that is not something people should be taking their values from today. We have absolutely grown past that. And I think we should be able to update our religions to the point where that is gone. But at the same time, even people like Netanyahu, more secular, I actually don't know Netanyahu's particular religious beliefs, so I'm making some assumptions here, and I apologize if I'm ultimately found wrong. But I assume he doesn't believe in the actual historicity of this. But he's given up all those things. He's given up the historicity, and this is the part that he chose to hold on to, was the actual values of it, to want to cite that in modern times. That is very, very disappointing as to human character. And all the other Israelis and Jews that, think similarly, and I've said similar things, it's very disappointing that that's what they would choose to hold on to. But it makes sense when what the core of what you're still believing in is the tribal narrative, because of course you'd still believe the us versus them, we need to survive and they need to die, part of the story. So it's sad, and there's no, they'll claim, because this was the particular citing of the story of Amalek in the war, what is being used in the International Court of Justice case that South Africa brought against Israel. So part of the defense that's been offered is, no, they were just talking about Hamas. They were just calling Hamas Amalek. But there's no credible way to interpret it that way, because the whole thing about Amalek was that you were supposed to destroy the women and the children and the oxen and all the stuff. So
is it okay to slaughter the children of Hamas? Like, if someone has for the rest of eternity, like, is it okay to kill the animals of Hamas? Like, this is, even if we just put it only on Hamas, like, Hamas is itself a collection of people who are more or less guilty of things, and they have children and they have pets, and do we say, okay, do we kill the children and the pets of Hamas? That this is what they're doing. They are saying it's acceptable to bomb and destroy the children and the pets of Hamas. We're just going to drop 2,000-pound bombs on apartment buildings and kill all of them. Like, it's acceptable. So
for any listener who doubts that, you should know that Israel had a policy during this war called the Where's Daddy program, where they specifically waited for militants to return home before bombing them. So they waited to bomb until they were with their wives and children. So this is not particularly deniable at this point in the war. The evidence is overwhelming. There's also the starvation policy to try to pressure the civilian population to overthrow Hamas, which has, they keep saying they're on the verge of starvation, but it started to lead to a couple actual malnutrition deaths in children now. So, if you don't believe that this is what's happening, I urge you to look at the evidence more deeply, because it's very clear by this point and very disappointing. So with all that said, why do you think that this belief has gone on for so long? You talk in the end of the book, and this was how we first got in contact, was you reached out to me because you mentioned a couple people that identify as ex-Jews at the end of your book. One was me, one was Shlomo Sand, there were a couple other ones. And that this is very rare. People that have actually gone on to challenge the, you know, not just the religious narrative, but the ethno-religious narrative. Why do you think that this is so rare? Why do you think that both Jews continue to see themselves this way, but also the whole non-Jewish population that doesn't believe in any parts of this religion, doesn't come from this tradition? Why do they still see the Jewish population this way?
I think it's a combination of just, one of it is just, it's confusing that it's simple, I think, once a person kind of understands it. But before that, if a person's raised in a culture, in a society, in a world that conceives Jews as a race or ethnicity, they might just not question it. They might, and then when someone does do that, and you have certain vested interests that don't want to have that changed, it becomes dangerous to even question that. It becomes uncomfortable to question that. It's and it's also it's a religious idea. It's just like, was Jesus resurrected? 60% of the American population would probably say yes. The good billions of humans on the planet are going to say yes, and not vast majority who are raised in that ideology and that culture aren't going to question fundamental aspects of what, like, almost like moral ideas, in the sense that they are what makes you on the path. Like, if you question the resurrection of Jesus, then you're a bad Christian, and that makes you a black sheep, and people don't want to be black sheep generally. And the same thing with the ethno-mythology of Judaism. It is something that is promoted by Zionists especially, and has been promoted by Christian Zionists, both. So Jewish Zionists and Christian Zionists have kind of promoted within the culture that Jews are an ethnicity. And there is the fact that the idea of, like, I've talked to people, and they're like, they always mention that, well, Jews are identified by if their mother is Jewish, then they're Jewish, right? And it's like, well, yes, that's part of the religious ideology of Judaism. But understanding that just because the religion has that belief doesn't make it true. It's just like, it's similar to trans ideology. So the questioning of, like, what is a woman, what is a man, like, it has become a political contentious idea and moral debate about, like, even saying, okay, are trans women? If you say no, then there's and how do trans women decide that they're women? Is sometimes it's just that's because they believe they are. It's similar to the notion of Jews as a race or ethnicity. It's because people believe that they are. It is, and challenging that is challenging. It's not. People are very resistant to it, and there's a lot of hostility, and to even mention it. Like, it's like I get more, like, before I wrote about this stuff, I was writing about how I've challenged the trans ideology, I challenged the BLM ideology, but this stuff is the most morally hazardous in my experience. Like just how much hatred is expressed by not having what is considered the orthodox view on these ideas. And so I think that is a big element of it. And because there is a certain amount of, like, there is within Jewish culture and even the history of Judaism, there is actually an emphasis on genealogical purity, where there is endogamy as being as kind of practiced as part of the religion, even though there's a lot of racial diversity and genealogical diversity. There is still that is a practice of the religion itself. So I think that presents a confusing aspect of untangling what's happening.
Yeah, it's literally racist. I mean, I know.
I was avoiding using the word racist, but yeah.
It's, well, okay, let's talk about it. So, yeah, it's literally racist. I mean, I know, many, again, so-called secular Jews who don't believe in Yahweh, don't believe any of this is from God, but feel that it's important, that they marry within the tribe. Their families feel that it's important that they marry within the tribe. And that is racism. I mean, you're just saying that you're engaging in discrimination based on race.
Based on lineage, based on like who are your ancestors? Oh, your ancestors.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
It's so hard because there are conventional ways that we talk about it, and those are so built up that once you challenge the very narrative of seeing this as a race, seeing this as an ethnic group, it's hard to start talking differently about it, even though we have to, because it's not that. So I'll keep using the word tribe, because that's probably a better word, because a tribe is basically, however people decide to group together. It's not based in anything objective except for the fact that they have made that decision to see themselves that way. So, okay, so it's very important to those families that marriage continue within the tribe, even though they don't have any of the supernatural beliefs. That clearly meets the definition of racism. And a little bit over a year ago, I did a debate here on the Black Sheep with somebody named David Bernstein, and the debate was over, what relationship should American Jews have with Israel, and I gave a whole opening speech, and I sort of explained in there that, we should merge, and I call myself an ex-Jew for this reason, because the concept of Jewish ethnicity isn't really coherent, and if we're not going to connect with that tribal identity, then certainly we shouldn't support, a foreign ethno-state that's doing things in its names when we're Americans and we've lived here our entire lives. And many of us I have traveled there, but many of us have never traveled there. So, that was kind of the point. And at the end of the debate, we got into intermarriage, and I said that it was racist, and he didn't like that very much because I'm shutting down discourse by calling it racism. And that's
they don't
tricky.
Care about calling it they don't call it thing. They like to shut down discourse when they talk about anti-Semitism. That's the point.
So this guy, to his credit, I think he's a little bit more intellectually honest. I don't think he does that so much, but almost all the other people that share his beliefs do, for sure, exactly that.
One thing I want to emphasize is that the way that anti-Semitism is used, the concept of Semitism, the notion of Semitism is a racial ideology that was created by Wilhelm Marr. It's actually, I have it in my book. You can go and read his stuff. And the term Semitism was, as far as I know, coined by him. And it was referring to natural racial ideas of what Jews were. So like it was a racial idea of what Jews are. And thus, the whole possibility of anti-Semitism rests on the notion that Jews are a race or ethnicity, that there's something called Semitism, and these people are anti-Semitism. What is Semitism? Is just weird racial ideology about Jews. If a person doesn't believe that Jews are a race, they cannot be espousing anti-Semitism. It's just impossible. So I find the way that even anti-Zionist Jews will, if someone criticizes Judaism, they will suggest that, oh, they are expressing anti-Semitism. And no, Judaism isn't Semitism. Someone can have antipathy towards Judaism and Jewish ideology and Jewish practices, or just like they can have towards Christian practices or ideology, and it doesn't make them racist. Like Judaism is a religion. Jews are a religious group, and disparaging anything about Judaism is not fundamentally racist. It can be if the person has this view of Jews as a race, but it's not fundamentally, it's not essentially. And that, I feel like there's so much dishonesty. It's just extreme dishonesty, or just unwillingness to just recognize like just that basic thing that we can criticize Judaism. People can criticize Judaism just as much as they can criticize Islam or Christianity. Like, why can all these books about how horrible Islam is, and these are, anti-woke people writing these books about how horrible Islam is, and they're like, oh, but we're not, this isn't racist. And I agree with them. It's not racist, but it's just anti-Islam, which is, and that's perfectly like within the political, like, you're not going to lose your career if you do that. If you have expressions of antipathy towards Muslim ideology or Christian ideology, but once a person starts to criticize Jewish ideology, it becomes way more perilous from like American perspective. If I'm an American, my career is now potentially at risk just by doing that. And that is, I find that very frustrating, very disappointing. And there's no, like, I feel like I don't have anyone else that's doing it. Like, I kind of wish someone else would do it, because I personally, I would kind of rather be an engineer and only be an engineer. But I feel compelled, like morally almost compelled, to insert myself into this political dialogue, because I feel like my view is just not represented. And if I don't express it, I don't know if anyone's going to. And
well, I'm appreciative of your doing it for sure. It's nice. I mean, again, it was just really nice to come across your writing and have this experience of, oh, wow, somebody else figured out this criticism, this new way of seeing things that, it took me so many years to realize. And, I've talked to a lot of people about it in my private life before I started talking about it publicly. And I think it was very clarifying for people in my private life once they were able to start seeing it that way, because what we're saying is true. We're talking in the realm of facts. We're overturning superstition. So when you explain it to people, it makes sense. But there's just so many assumptions that go unquestioned. And when it comes to the anti-Zionist Jews that you're talking about, I think that there's a real desire not to question also, because they're attached to it. They get a lot of their sense of meaning out of being a part of this people. That's where a lot of the spirituality, insofar as there is much spirituality in Judaism, I find it a much less spiritual religion than what I've seen from Christians and Buddhists. Maybe it's more similar to Islam, but where it comes from, insofar as it has it, it's this connection to a people. It's feeling one with a people. more than it's feeling like one with the universe or one with God or something like that, which you might see in other religions, or saved by Christ or something like that. It comes through.
There is a body of Christ in Christianity. There is the body of Christ that occurs in Christianity. So there's a mystical union of all the Christians.
Yeah.
That is expressed in Christianity.
Yeah, but what they're merging with isn't, because of the Trinity, it's not just, Jesus the human. They're merging with the entire Godhead, which, I think has more spiritual depth, I might think.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the way that we have like spirituality is like, I think connecting with others, having the feeling of connection, social connection and bonding is essentially what people are feeling with these experiences that they have, is they're experiencing social connection. It's a social emotion that they're feeling. And
I'm not, sorry, go ahead.
No, so when it comes to spirituality, I think they there's interpretations of their emotions, and they often they project their emotional experiences onto their religious ideology or their spiritual ideology, but the actual experiences are derived from the feelings of social emotions primarily, and there's other things as well. Like if someone believes in an afterlife, for example, just the feeling of it feels nice to be immortal, right? That is just a feeling of existential tranquility on some level. But spiritual feelings are ultimately natural emotions, like they're just animal feelings. But some, because of their context and what they're related to, like when it comes to the rituals and things like that, they're elevated in some way. But they're essentially, they're animalistic emotions and feelings.
Yes, I agree that spirituality is about connection. This is what people that take psychedelics, which includes myself, report, and this is what advanced meditators report, and this is also what I've heard from many Christians. What I don't know that it's necessarily social connection, though. It's connectedness to everything, which can mean a dissolution of boundaries, which, it can mean feeling connected to the earth, feeling connected to plants, feeling connected to just the world in a big sense. That includes connection to people, and connection to people is a big part of that. And where I'm not saying that in Judaism, the connection to people is a problem. What I'm saying is a problem is the connection to certain people over other people, at being the whole entire guide to that spirituality. Whole entire is probably overstating it, but very close to that. So I take issue with that, because I think it prevents that larger connection, that much more powerful connection to all people and to all things in the world. Again, not that there's none of that in Judaism, and there's wonderful teachings about tikkun olam, healing the world, and a lot of the stuff that you see quoted from the Talmud about, we can treat the Gentiles terribly. That is fake. That is not true. You're supposed to treat everybody well, Jew or Gentile, but the spiritual connection comes much more through the Jewish peoplehood, and there being God's chosen people with a certain mission to perform on this earth with each other. So, people get their meaning through that. Spirituality is a deep guide to me, a deep path to meaning. You could potentially even say that all meaning comes through some form of spirituality or another. And I wrote an essay here at the Black Sheep called What Brings You Meaning is Bad and You Should Feel Bad. And the essay doesn't talk about Judaism or religion too much, but it talks a lot about how people can attach to these things that give them meaning. And once they attach to that, you develop an entire worldview on top of that. And cognitive dissonance gets in the way of any breakdown. You can build meaning around things that are anywhere between extremely toxic or not ideal, and good, but we're not worried about the good things that bring people meaning, that they should keep bringing people meaning. But, if you are what are the examples I give in the essay? I think one is the princeling, or it was at least in the draft of the essay, if it's not there, where it's like you get your sense of meaning in life from the fact that you're important, right? Because
what is the meaning of meaning?
What is the meaning of meaning? So
what is the meaning of meaning? I that's a serious question. Like, I think that the term meaning is often obscured. So especially when it comes to like our experiences of our emotional experiences, and when it comes to talking about things like spirituality, and I think there's a lot of just ambiguity and almost obscurity. There's obscurity in what people are talking about, and so what do you talk?
I think that it's a sense of alignment with either purpose or something that makes somebody not have to find a purpose because they're contented. That's not very clear. Let me try to clarify that further.
When you say purpose,
yeah, literally, like, what do they do? Like, what is your path in life? Like, what are you supposed to do at the big picture level? Not from day to day, although it has day-to-day implications that settle down from the top level. But what is your path in life, and are you living in concert with that path? And if you feel that you are, you feel good, you feel calm, you feel relaxed, you don't feel anxiety. And if you're not, a lot of anxiety comes in because you're like, it's existential. What am I supposed to be doing in my life? What am I supposed to be doing in this world? I don't know. And so people need that filled. It's the thing that's called the God hole, right? And the idea that religions fill, by serving God, you have a path. God is the ultimate meaning. God is the ultimate good. God is all of this. And so you follow that, and that gives you a sense of meaning because you're doing things in line with the ultimate good. And then you feel calm and relaxed and all that. And, I don't think it's good to fill that hole through supernatural beliefs or things that we don't have actual reason to believe in. I think that hole can be filled through all sorts of other things. I think it can be filled through secular philosophy. I think, I'm a big fan of Ayn Rand, so I think objectivism provides one particular path towards answering that, but there are others. Some are good and some are bad. Religious people will often criticize wokeness or communism can fill that God hole and give people, that sense of meaning and purpose. And I think those are very bad ways to fill it. I agree with them, but that doesn't mean that I want to fill it, that the only option is to fill it with something, supernatural that we don't have any reason to believe in. We need to fill it with something that is actually good, that we can use reason to determine is good, and that we can use correct reason because, yeah, they used reason to get to communism, but they didn't. I mean, the philosophy is broken. It believes in all sorts of things like, the labor theory of value, that, value in an item comes from, the amount of work that was put into it, which we know to be false through reason. So it's, an entire system that's built on a false foundation. So all of this to sort of come back to say that, meaning coming through connection to the Jewish people, sometimes that's very harmless, but sometimes I think it's harmful. And I think it's harmful in how it instantiates in Zionism. And there's other ways that it's been harmful through history, just kind of keeping Jewish populations separate from surrounding populations in ways that created fertile grounds for anti-Semitism. So with these anti-Zionist Jews, I think it's disappointing that they're still so attached to that, and that's where they get their meaning from. And yes, they have a much better version of it than the Zionists have. They don't want to do the same things with that. But you can see how really the difference there, it's not super philosophical. People will make philosophical arguments on top of their psychology, but it is the psychology, right? There's some people that, take that deep feeling of connection to the Jewish peoplehood and go and do Zionism and, are more thinking more in us versus them ways, and, will then really don't not care about a genocide in Gaza, or at the worst edges, even support a genocide in Gaza. And, that belief mixed with other psychologies, like, oh, it's just nice. We just get a sense of connection to each other, but there's no hatred that comes along with that. But really, once you have that base, it's the psychology is going to determine the manifestation of how it comes out more than I think philosophy is determining any of that. Do you agree? Did that make sense once I talked more about meaning?
Well, I think, for me, meaning, it's hard for me to separate meaning from social emotion. So the meaning that I would say that a lot of Jews get from being part of the tribe of Israel, or the people of Israel, is feelings of pride, feelings of righteousness, being good and being honorable. And these emotions come from this social or social environment, people telling us that, in some way, expressing that we should be proud, or that what we're doing is good, and what we're doing is right, and what we're doing is on the right path. And this is a social phenomenon. And I think that that's a very powerful, since humans are essentially social animals, and we have needs that are social in nature. Like, as much as I need to eat food, I need to feel respected, and I need to feel loved. And when I do not get these needs met, I feel miserable. This is people can attempt to bypass using other people to get these needs, but it's usually not effective. It's like trying to hug ourselves. It's not as effective as getting a hug.
Mm-hmm.
And Jewish identity and being part of the Jewish people feels like a really, really big hug, and it feels really honorable. Like, they feel proud. I know that there's a lot of pride among Jews, because they boast. They boast about things openly, and like how great it was fascinating. It's so fascinating to see tribes boast, not just Jews, any tribe boasts about, it's a sports team, for example. People vicariously experience the triumphs and failures of others through the tribe. They vicariously feel elated. They vicariously feel saddened, and they will feel the whole pride of the tribe for what an individual of the tribe does, even though they aren't necessarily a part of it. So Jews are proud of Einstein. Now, Einstein makes sense where Einstein would be proud of Einstein. But for like some random Jew today to be like, I'm part of the tribe of Einstein, like it's a bit of a indulgence, but it's just reality. It's the way that human psychology and tribal psychology works. And to remove yourself from a source of so much pleasure, like I am part of the tribe of Einstein, can be very painful. And this happens with racial tribe, like just like ethnic tribes as well. So like people who are quote white Europeans who identify like white nationalists, and people are very proud of Western civilization, for example. That is like they had nothing to do with Hume or Adam Smith or all the accomplishments of these various individuals that developed the technology and the societies of Western civilization, whatever that is. But they are very proud of being part of it. They're part of. It's not only that they've chosen the values of what they consider Western civilization, but they have put it in themselves that they are somehow responsible for it. Like they get credit for it because their ancestors were doing this. And not even necessarily ancestors, just people who were in the same geography and in the same nations, and just had some shared genealogical imagined heritage. People will feel pride about it, and that is a big part of what is, I suspect, keeping many Jews within Judaism and any other tribe when it comes to like the Ku Klux Klan, for example, is very proud of white history, and they had nothing to do with it.
But this is exactly the point. My friend Daryl Davis, who is a black man who's famous for going and befriending white supremacists and ultimately like getting them to leave their hate groups and renounce that worldview. He says exactly the same thing. Like, what is white pride? What is black pride? This is ridiculous. It's not. You should only be proud of things that you did. Anything else is a corruption of the very idea of pride. It's okay to be happy or thankful, for what other people are doing.
I don't think that's completely true. I think that it makes sense to be proud of, like, say my friends or my girlfriend, some people who I'm close to, people who I actually have a very close relationship to. I support them emotionally. I support them potentially materially, and they do things that I'm proud of.
Well, you had something to do with it then. I mean, if you're actively supporting them.
Right. But there's a distance, right? I didn't do this thing. So Einstein's friends, right? They're proud of Einstein. They're proud to be friends with Einstein because Einstein's accomplishments. Okay. And I think there's sense in that. There's some sense in being proud of your friends because of your friends' affiliation with you. Like there's complexity, and there's some, like what you said though, there's certainly a place where there's this fraudulent, where if you're feeling proud, like black pride, white pride, these like ethno prides, is just fraudulent. It's not something to be proud of. To have that.
I mean, I'm still gonna say, I think somebody should only be proud in their own accomplishments. But I mean, I think a lot of what you laid out there, it is, you contributed to that accomplishment. I think it's totally reasonable to feel that connection and be proud of that connection. I think that if you're friends with Einstein, even if you didn't really have any connection to what he accomplished per se, you can be proud of yourself for holding a friendship with Einstein because, oh, look at me. I get to be friends. I get to be friends with this like famous person who did such great things, and like, wow, like that's wonderful for me. But yeah, and then what you're saying is once it gets to the ethnic level, though, like this just breaks apart. Like that's not anything you did. That's so many degrees removed that you just had nothing to do with it. There's no action, particularly when you're born into it, right? Who you're friends with, you had to take some action at some point in time, even if it was as a young child, to be friends with somebody.
Right.
You are just born into a group, or certain types of groups. So I don't think that that's rational. You just had nothing to do with any sort of accomplishment whatsoever. And I think, happy, thankful, great, proud, I think that gets very dangerous very fast and turns into the white pride place and turns into the black pride place and the Jewish pride place, as we see so viscerally amongst the Israeli right right now. So I forget why we're talking about all that.
Jewish. What keeps people in?
Oh yeah. So I think I think a lot of it's a sense of meaning that people get out of that, and I'm not against what you're talking about. Like people live in society. You can't hug yourself. You need to be connected with other people. You want to be in a good group that's doing well. But when this isn't holding up at this point of human civilization, at previous points in time, we didn't have the internet, or, we didn't have any kind of mass communication or distant communication whatsoever. Who your group was the people that you lived with and the people that you interacted with on a day-to-day basis. Now, your identity group can span the world. You only share one thing in common. You have basically nothing to do with them whatsoever. And that gets to unhealthy places. I mean, it gets to unhealthy places very clearly when people colonize then Palestine, under that notion of, well, we're coming from all over the world. It was mostly Europe at that point, but more people come in later. And, we're all going to be one people here. And there was a real creation of peoplehood out of Jews that, was, like we've been talking about, like existed forever. It's part of the religion, but it really heightened it. I mean, they recreated Hebrew as a modern day spoken language and all started speaking that again. And, they all, created new Israeli culture. And it's very impressive in a lot of ways what they accomplished. But was it good? Was it good to do that rather than, just be in a society with the people that were around you? And anti-Semitism at many points in history withheld that possibility. So I don't want to begrudge that not being taken at times when it wasn't available to be taken. But there were many times when it was available to be taken and it still wasn't chosen. And I don't know, the Jewish narrative is that that's something to be proud of, right? That choice to keep Judaism going, something that really is done on the individual level, that's something to be very proud of, that it is still going, 3,000 years later. And I don't think that is something to be proud of at all. I think that it created division between people. It created grounds for anti-Semitism. It doesn't justify anti-Semitism of any sort, but it's not some sort of virtue that you were keeping yourself separate and, really identifying with this ancient group rather than the people that you are actually living around, in diaspora Jewry. So I saw,
I always feel a little bit sad when racial tribalism saddens me. Like I don't like, and I consider Judaism racially tribal, even though Jews aren't a race. They still have a tendency, Judaism and Jews have a tendency to elevate and place as being more valuable people of particular lineages than other people. Okay. And that supersedes the personality and character of other individuals, meaning the Jewish people or white people or black people or Christians or Buddhists or whatever become more valuable and people are more willing to care for them, to connect to them, to help them, to just they value them more just because of these traits. And I think especially when it comes to like ethno groups that emphasize lineage, it saddens me because I see people who have like that's what they're saying. They're saying, "Oh, I value more than I value like your curiosity or your willingness to be civil or any kind of generic. I'm just going kindness or bravery or courage. Use Aristotle's virtues rather than the virtues of Aristotle. You care about who your mother was, and that is it's offensive to me. It's like, look, I am me, and I have these character traits and personality traits, and what you're telling me is that regardless of my personality and my character, you value me less than this person over here who could have some really shitty character or personality simply because they have the right mother. And I don't think that's deserving of it's not, people shouldn't try to preserve that culture, any culture like that. And that is not something that a person should be proud of, the fact that their parents were part of it. Like there's no, like, I am not a Christian, right? My parents were raised Christians, but I don't, just because my grandparents were Christian doesn't mean that I have like, that I value Christians more than I value other people of other groups. Like I look at the individual and I can find people who are Christian or Jewish or Buddhist or Muslim or even a clan member, theoretically, that I might be able to connect with. I imagine that if I do connect with a clan member or some other groups, they're likely not going to remain being a clan member very long because they would see the problem. Like there's going to be a natural disconnect. They're going to be like, our guest doesn't deserve to be disrespected. And
that's very much Daryl Davis's story, by the way.
Yeah. Oh yeah. He goes into, tries to help Klansmen.
And that's basically exactly what happens over the course of like sometimes months, sometimes years of knowing those people. Is they're like, well, wait, I know Daryl. This belief system doesn't make sense, and it starts to crumble and fall apart.
Yeah. So when it comes to Jews, even anti-Zionist Jews, there's something that still disconnects me, that still separates me from anti-Zionist Jews. I am not part of their people. Why am I not? How can I be part of their people? The only way I can be part of their people is if I convert to Judaism. And for me, a non-person without a Jewish mother, I would need to go through some kind of ritual where I essentially learn about Jewish tradition and I would have to essentially do what they don't do, which is I would need to follow the Torah. So they have this divide. Like, you can't, like, all you people that are not part of Judaism can't join us Jews unless you go through this ritual and have to do this stuff that we don't even do. But we will continue having this like bond with each other that is separate from what you would have to go through even to become one of us. It's a very discombobulating expectation that I feel like exists among Jews. Like they and this happens, of course, with Christians and Buddhists as well. But the difference between Christians and Buddhists is that they at least have usually more than, oh, my parents believed in this, or my parents followed this, or my I was born to a Buddhist mother. Like there's more to that. So yeah, I just want Jews to, anti-Zionist Jews, like atheist Jews, just to leave Judaism. Like, come on, come join me outside of the herd, outside of the tribe, where why do you stay there, even though you tell me you're going to tell me that, oh yeah, that was really shitty what Moses did.
I think the problem is that they don't really see it as an option because they haven't heard this perspective, which is one of the reasons I'm so happy to find your writing and that this is being shared, because I want to help people see it this way so that they see it as an option and that there can be this merging of peoples over the future. I wrote an essay about the American melting pot, which is written by a Jew, Israel Zangwill. It's the concept of the melting pot is based on a play of the same name. And I read this play. It's just an absolute masterpiece. And it also really communicates well the idea of that was named after it, which is this idea that here in America, we could all become one people. And at the time when Zangwill wrote that, I think he was very attached to, I know he was very attached to his Judaism and Jewish ethics and philosophy. Even though he was not Orthodox, he was, I think, Reform and not really particularly believing Reform. But so perhaps these ideas were a little bit too early for him. And he was also trying multiple strategies at once to save Europe's Jews. So, at one time he was a Zionist, like full blown, because there's no choice. We need a place to be safe. At another time, he's writing the melting pot and being like, let's just integrate into America. America provides this great opportunity that isn't present in Europe. And then he sort of, immigration gets restricted and he goes back to being a Zionist. So he's an interesting figure. But that vision that's in that play and that I wrote about, I find it so meaningful and so powerful. And I don't think people can get there until they stop seeing Jewishness the way that they're used to seeing it, that it's something that can melt over a long period of time in a melting pot as we become one people, and get our primary identity from, the people that, we are interacting with on a daily basis, that we're living with. I think that's going to be good if we can get people to see it. So we've been going for a while. I want to build towards the end. And I think this is a good pivot point to what's going to happen next. Are we going to be successful? Are we going to get people to see this thing that we want them to see? And then on the other side, the identity politics movement, or the anti-identity politics movement broadly, that was so active when the woke excesses were on the left, now seems in tatters. They don't want to do any of the challenging that you and I are doing with Jewish identity, even though it's a direct continuation of what was happening with all the other identity groups. And then in the absence of that practice and, having a consistent, anti-identitarian mindset being promoted, we have seen a rise of classical anti-Semitism and Christian nationalism and, white identity and a lot of things that seem like a backlash to the woke left, but they're, the principled movement that I think you and I are the remnants of is no longer there in mass to put a lid on that. So what do you think about all of that? Are people going to get what we're saying? Is there a path for us? And is there a future for our vision of an anti-identity politics movement?
Well, I hope there is. I'm not a prophet, so I can't predict that what the future is going to be. But I hope there will be, and I think it's possible. It's plausible that there's a fact that we're even talking now is a little bit is meaningful. Like there's since I've ran this, since I wrote the book, there are some former Jews two former Jews who I know were influenced by me. One that was directly influenced by me, and then another that was influenced by him. So, and I think, and they're kind of expressing the same views now as we are. I think because what's interesting, what's nice, it's what's really promising about Jews, or I should say secular, quote, secular Jews, what people consider secular Jews, the people who consider themselves secular Jews. What's promising about them versus, say, Christian nationalists is that they often have an implicit expression. They express a respect for rationality and reason and objectivity and are not. They are going to be more amenable to our arguments simply because I'm biased, of course. So I think our arguments are reasonable and rational, and therefore, since they have a value, they value that to an extent that compared to, say, Christian nationalists, where they still have like a very much more likely to have a unquestioning devotion and faith in what they believe. It's just that a lot of, I think, secular Jews haven't questioned it because they haven't been presented with it. Like they just haven't thought about it. Like they just, so once they become introduced to it and they start chewing on it, it's going to be like a pebble in their shoe, and they're just going to keep on stepping on it until, okay, assuming that they are reasonable people, they're eventually going to be like, okay, well, either I'm going to start loving Moses or I'm going to stop being a Jew. Like those are two options that a person would reasonably have. Either you say Moshe or whatever, how you pronounce his name, is a righteous and honorable man that was doing God's will, and he enslaved the women and children for the Jewish people, or Moses was a lunatic.
If I can just interject briefly there, the horrible human being, Meir Kahane, wrote a book called Why Be Jewish? And I think every secular Jew should read that book. And the reason is that he spends almost the entirety of the book. There's a like final section that moves into something different, but like laying out like, okay, if you don't actually believe in this literally, what's going to be the societal consequences? Like the Jewish community complains about all this intermarriage. Well, the only solution to that is actual hardcore Orthodox Judaism fully believing, right? And I read it and I've never felt so understood. Like he really got me like totally, because he's laying out, he calls me in this story that he tells over the entirety of the book, Bernie, like the archetype of Bernie, the Jew who intermarries. Like, why did he make that choice and why did he choose to leave the community and all that sort of stuff. And he just keeps listing out the reasons and what that person was told and what that person believes and how that person reacts to the things the Jewish community is saying, the things the Jewish community says they're supposed to care about. But he doesn't care about that because, you know, he has this secular mindset, and it's exactly correct. It's just exactly perfectly correct. But he wants people to go in the other direction. But I think he's, you know, a wildly unhinged human being. And so I think any reasonable person who reads that is going to understand, oh yeah, I mean, I completely agree with the Bernie archetype. So yeah, so it's the best argument for going the other way of what Kahane, you know, wanted people to go. And it just makes so much sense when you see it laid out like that. When you see it laid out, what an Orthodox Jew thinks the consequences of non-belief should be, and he gets it right, and makes it very clear for, you know, the non-believing Jews what the consequences should be for us. And it means, well, we don't believe in that stuff. We follow the logically consistent path of our secularism.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think that I mentioned Kana in my book, and because that's basically his wing of Judaism is the spear, is the tip of the spear when it comes to Israel. It's the unfortunately leading faction in Israel that is, I will say, essentially controlling much of our foreign policy in the United States. And Americans need to come to just realize how much power the Jewish Power Party, the Jewish Power faction, quite literally, this is the name of the party that is essentially leading and moving Israel in the direction it is. How much influence they have over American politics. It's really sad and just should anger Americans that our Congress has essentially mostly sold out to this horrible faction that is annihilating people and plundering our taxes for that purpose. There was like, yeah, it was writing my book was generally an unpleasant endeavor. It was not something like, because just the psychological toll it took on me was not good. Like it was hard to write at times because of just the process of what's going on.
It's so sad.
Yeah.
It's so sad. To know what's been done in the name of these ideas. And, you know, Ben Gvir was just, you know, leader of the Jewish Power Party. Was just here meeting with congressmen. Yeah, was welcomed. So that's very disappointing. Okay, and so we hope that Jews are going to get this message once they're presented with it, and we just got to get the word out. What about the anti-identity politics movement? I have been kind of encouraged I just don't know what way it's going to go. But I was feeling very encouraged by Douglas Murray's just like brutal implosion in his Joe Rogan debate against Dave Smith. And it seems like that the discourse around that just kind of opened floodgates around, no, we're going to talk about this. You're not going to tell us that, we're not allowed to talk about this,
Right, yeah.
which that side has been trying to do. So now where they come to, I don't know. I do have some concern that the, brutally anti-Semitic faction could, really get going. And that could be, quite bad. I wouldn't want to see that. But at the same time, it's my hope that what you and I are doing provides a better path, because I think people are looking for answers. Like, they know what Israel's doing is fucked up. And if the classical anti-Semites are the only ones providing answers for why this is happening, that's how people will go, because again, they're not being presented with something better. Do you think that there is space for this message to be heard and kind of recenter people away from just reacting to the anti-woke excesses by going into, or reacting to the woke excesses on the left by going, white and Christian nationalists? Can what we're doing provide a better answer that allows people to take this pure anti-identity politics path and can recreate that movement?
Yeah, I think so. I think that the way that you have the BLM movement is a great example of what happens and what the value of our path might be, is that when the BLM movement started, the essentially black racists or black supremacists or something, I call them black supremacists would be a good term for them, just the same as white supremacists. And they identify as black, and they are tribally black, and just like there's tribally white people, and they identify as white, and they think that the other races are somehow an enemy, and they can't be trusted, and they just need to be separate, and they need to segregate themselves. And for whatever reason, they have tribalized over their conceived racial heritage. And what ends up happening is I still see this with friends who have European ancestry, who will see these people, and they start feeling like, oh, we need to tribalize. Like, we need to tribalize around race because these other people are tribalizing around race. And they begin to think that, like, these voices of these black supremacists are the representation of people who have African ancestry, and they start to politically and psychologically orient themselves to that menace that they perceive. When you have people like John McWhorter and Glenn Lowry and Coleman Hughes and people who have African ancestry, do not express the same level of, aren't black supremacists, aren't trying to tribalize around their conceived racial ancestry, and are trying to send a message of like, hey, we can have this doesn't have to be a division between us. Like, we have shared values. We can regardless of our ancestry, we can come together with shared values and be friends. Those same people become less, they de-radicalize. They realize, okay, this is just one faction, but these other people, they represent something that's sane, and I don't have to radicalize because they exist. These people exist. And I think that when it comes to anti-Semitism, if all you have are people, when it comes to criticizing Judaism, when it comes to criticizing Israel, and pointing out the worst offenses of them, and just the weird shit that sometimes they do, and are genuine anti-Semites, where they think that Jews are a race and that they have nefarious characteristics that they're just born with, and they're going to be terrorizing the world because they're Jews as Semites, then they're going to see that and they go, okay, well, this is the only narrative I know. This is the only model of the world I know, and these are the only people that are actually seeing things the way I'm seeing things. At least some of the things they're seeing the way I'm seeing them, and just that, it's going to make them more likely to accept the other shit, which is horrible, which is just as bad as or potentially worse as what Zionists are peddling. So I think having space to be able to say and think and to feel antipathy towards Judaism and towards some Jews, the Jews like Ben Gvir, and the Jews like Smotrich, and the Jews like Benjamin Netanyahu, and not have to like step on fucking glass whenever you say, oh, well, there's something fishy going on with the Jewish religion, and is going to open people's minds a little, potentially, hopefully, and be able to not go down the path of, okay, these people that are part of like the Zionist Jews or the anti-Zionist Jews, and just the Jews that are just totally oblivious of what's going on in the world because they don't really care. Like, they're not Ben Gvir. They're not, and it's nothing to do with their ancestry or their supposed race and all this other shit that comes with actual real anti-Semitism. Like, they can begin to see the possibility that, hey, Jews can become former Jews, and they can actually reject this stuff, or they don't necessarily need to become former Jews, but they become less like Ben Gvir and Smotrich, and it's not because of their inborn characteristics. That is that's something that I think former Jews, like being a former Jew, having more former Jews and making this a reality, people will see, oh wait, Jews aren't a race. People are leaving this thing. Therefore, Jews are not a race. I can't stop having African ancestry. Like, that's just not possible. But I can leave like Christianity, I can leave Judaism, I can leave BLM, I can leave the tribal, the faction, the political faction of BLM. And breaking up people's connection, like this is simply helpful for, like, and it's very important because the former Jews, like the whole notion of like self-hating Jew, such, for someone who is not a Jew to be called a self-hating Jew is so fucked up in my mind. It's like it is just extremely disrespectful of a person's like spiritual choice, spiritual agency.
I think that's kind of the point.
Yes, it is kind of the point, but it's also it is the point, but they also believe it, right? They believe that, because unfortunately, Judaism again is that it has the racial mythology. So a lot of Jews have this view of other Jews as being, oh, you're born a Jew, and you can never leave being a Jew. Like that's, and then they think they're like they're basically race traitors for not joining whatever the fuck Ben Gvir is doing.
Mm-hmm.
And the same thing happens with like Black Lives Matter or white supremacists, black supremacists, race traitors. Like the concept of race traitor is one of the shittiest ideas, like this contemptible moral expressions that I'm aware of. And unfortunately, it is a very endemic to Judaism. And that's just like, people might, I just know, like, even when I say that, I have a little bit of anxiety. It's like, oh, okay, what are you saying? It's like, if I were to say Scientologists, there's a problem with Scientology where, if people leave Scientology, there's a lot of hatred towards them. By Scientologists, they're like apostates. Apostasy is generally just not liked by most religions.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just fact. That's a fact of Judaism. That's a fact of Islam. It's a fact of Christianity. It's a fact of every fucking religion that's major, is that the former group views them as like kind of betrayers. And
well, we love apostate. Sorry, go ahead.
People just need to be able to recognize that Jews can do that. People can be Jews and then not be Jews, just like Scientology, just like Buddhism. And then people can stop like flipping out about every possible criticism of Judaism, and also stop thinking of Jews as a race, and stop thinking of people who have heritage or parents that are Jewish as being still Jews.
Well, I agree with you entirely. I think that is an optimistic path there for, the fact that this can be recognized in time with more speech, more talking about it. We love apostates here at the Black Sheep. The apostate is just the perfect figure of the Black Sheep archetype. So if you're an apostate from any religion, any social movement, any cultural group, whatever you are an apostate from, I hope you will make your home here at the Black Sheep. Jeffrey, any last words, anything you'd like to plug before we turn off?
So I have written the Children of Amalek. There's also another longish essay that I've written on the history of the Democratic Party and its relationship to slavery. So it's a criticism of the Democratic Party. So that was my first major thing I published on Substack, and it was a criticism of the identity politics and the history of the Democratic Party. So people might want to look at that as well. It was originally published at Free Black Thought, which is another Substack out there that I've published at.
And so people can find these at minorityReport.substack.com. And for your Free Black Thought one, I think that's at Free Black Thought, but I can see you're just at Minority Report on Substack. That's your user handle. So if people find you as a user, they will be able to, read both the Free Black Thought one and the one on your own publication. Thank you so much for coming here and doing this with me, Jeffrey. I hope we'll do more of these again in the future. I'm super glad to have met you and have gotten to read your work, and I hope our listeners will all do the same. People can follow me here on Substack at wetheblacksheep.com. These streams also happen on YouTube, Twitter. This one's not on Instagram, but Salome's are on Instagram, and mine probably will be in the future. So follow us any place you like to watch video or do your reading. Thank you all so much, and we'll be back another day.